Well, greetings. Today, I wanted to talk about a topic that, on first glance, you might think, uh-oh, this is the big AI talk, and about how AI is going to really help us when it comes to, exit planning, and, AI is going to do this, that, it's going to cause 86% of people to lose their jobs, and this. Well, rest assured, today's discussion is not about AI. However, what we are going to be taking a look at is, as I pull up our um, PowerPoint presentation for today's webinar, is we're going to be looking at tech stack killing, exit killing mistakes. Now, I know that AI has definitely changed the game plan in some ways, but in many ways, not a lot. And really, everything that we're going to be looking at as far as tech stack here today, just forget about AI. These are things that we're actually using in some capacity that we need to get optimized and ready. So let's start out by taking a look at this, and that is that your adequate technology could be costing you millions at exit. I'm going to use a bit of an extreme of example. Marriott-Starwood merger lost over $1 billion due to tech integration issues. Now, think about that. That's not 1 million, that's $1 billion. And these problems, they passed standard operational due diligence, but the big issue was good enough to operate is not equal as good enough to sell. And the reality is 62% of M&A deals can be delayed by cybersecurity issues. I mean, would you want to be buying a business that has some documented security threats? I don't think anybody would. And, there's a possibility that some cybersecurity issues could cause a valuation to drop anywhere from 7 to 12%. So you might be thinking, how does a multi-billion-dollar merger with a sophisticated technology teams lose $1 billion on tech issues? That's a really good question. Well, the answer is going to reveal a critical disconnect that affects businesses of all sizes. And what that is the disconnect is what works operationally and what passes M&A scrutiny that's going to show up in really 7 different specific areas. So you might be noticing that one of these, that I have 6 on this. There's a reason why there are only 6. I will get to that in a minute. But let's take a look at these 7 exit-killing technology mistakes. First of all, there's a legacy system that's entrapping you. Some of these, just because of how deeply embedded they're in, it could take 1.5 to 3 years to get. And the reality is, when it comes to this and really some of these other issues, you might be thinking, okay, well, am I going to be doing a lot of work with this if I were to be engaged as a fractional COO? The reality is that you and I would have some work, especially if you're the business owner. But most likely what is going to be happening is we're going to be, having other people in the company work on this, who work this on a day-to-day basis. We'll be doing some planning, but the reality is people who are probably involved in other aspects of it will be involved, and this will probably be happening coterminously with other things. So while this is important, this isn't going to necessarily be preoccupying our time just because of the way that things are. Now, another problem is technical debt, time bombs. We've built up, shortcuts over time that once we, really hit the tipping point, it's like, okay, now it's like, okay, well, what do we do? It's like we've been, basically creating a bandaged system, putting it together, and all of a sudden, we're looking at it like, okay, well, can we make this work? And the reality is probably not. And this is where, you would definitely probably need to bring in maybe a web developer as a contractor, or somebody who's going to need to look at and think, okay, how do we fix this issue? Cybersecurity risks, these are going to be vulnerabilities that are going to be threatening the deal integrity. And the reality is, you know, even cloud-based systems, they're susceptible to hacks. And even then, it could be something as simple as somebody being sent an invoice and billing, or excuse me, payables decides to go ahead and pay it, and oh, actually, they shouldn't have clicked on that because now they're basically held hostage. Software licensing, which when it comes to compliance, this is kind of an issue that's beginning to change a bit just because of the cloud. Um, I will talk a little bit on this particular issue, but it's not quite with software licensing. But, as we move away from, having these programs that you can download, it's changing to like, people trying to skirt it by like, okay, we'll just have like maybe one or two user accounts on say a cloud-based program and just give access to like say 50 people, which yeah, that's not how it works. So these so compliance and making sure you have the right number of user accounts. I mean, it could have been something like, okay, somebody bought a Microsoft Office package, basic Office suite, and they downloaded to say 50 computers, which obviously there's compliance. But basically making sure that whatever you're doing when it comes to licensing is compliant. Data architecture. It's poorly organized, and as a result, it's really hindering your integration potential. I mean, when it comes to data, just think about your customer records and how you have things organized there. It's possible that the data there that you have, it may not be even in a CRM, which means, okay, it's about as discombobulated as you can get. And then documentation gaps. How are people who run these different um, tech stack components in your company, how are they supposed to interact with them? What are they supposed to do with them? Do you have guidelines about the processes? And I remember when I worked with one company, working to develop processes and procedures for, when it came to getting work submissions from the field. And, first you would submit it into your accounting software. Then you would have these submit stuff into the CRM records. But the point is like, okay, it's like, how are you supposed to handle, you know, all these different components of your tech stack? What are you supposed to do? What needs to be done? Where does everything need to be going? And if you don't have this documented, well, you're playing with fire, especially if you're going to need to have multiple people working in these um, programs. Now, the final one is manual process anchors. As you can see, the reason I left this off is just because of the fact that, okay, this is stuff that's not even digitized. I remember hearing about this one company. It was actually a landscaping company that the owner is still doing all of their bids using a legal pad, taking notes, just writing things up and handing it. Doing stuff by hand like that, or, even then just not automating stuff that, you actually could seriously automate. Like, why should you do 15 entries when all you need is to have one and have it set up so that it syncs between all your systems? This is costing you a lot of time. And when I say a lot of time, I mean a lot of time. Now, with these issues, it could last anywhere from 18 to 36 months, which is with legacy systems that you're entrapped in, that you'll need to get it fixed. Technical debt, it could be 12 to 24 months to fix. And, that'll also all falls into data architecture. Cybersecurity black holes is 6 to 18 months. And then, 6 to 12 months is software data licensing landmines and documentation deserts. And then, obviously manual processes that, you're not even doing digitally, it could take another 12 to 18 months. In other words, a lot of this work, that this is stuff that, back in the 2010s, we, through cloud technologies and a lot of the automations, we were able to address these things. So that's why I said, we're not really going to be discussing AI today, is because we've actually had these tools and capabilities for a while. It's just simply a matter of doing them. So now that you've noticed the timelines that I've laid out, we're actually going to come back to why those matter in a moment. But first, let's take a look at something that is important. And that is the longest fix is going to take 18 to 36 months. Not arbitrary, that's likely the technical reality of modernizing legacy systems. And let's start there because this is the issue that's going to determine whether or not you can even complete your exit preparation. One thing I will use as an example that has actually come up recently is QuickBooks Desktop. I still can't believe that there are actually some companies out there that are really valuable that are actually using QuickBooks Desktop. In fact, actually, to be brutally honest, I'd even forgotten that QuickBooks Desktop was still purchasable just because of the fact that I had converted to QuickBooks Online over a decade ago. But since its support's been discontinued, now it's like, okay, how are we going to, not only move it to something that works, but also, is something like this still going to be serving us? And if you're in a business that's netting 20 million a year, QuickBooks Online, QuickBooks Desktop is woefully inadequate for you. In fact, I mean, even the most advanced QuickBooks Online might be. It might be you might be really best served by NetSuite, which is an ERP program, which that's an abbreviation that stands for End Resource Program, and that may actually be a better fit for you. So all that to say is, legacy systems that you just really have to move on from. This could be really, really, really big, just because it's like, okay, first of all, how do we migrate the data out of it? Just because, like, okay, we have to, because this is just not going to work. But then more importantly, okay, what are we going to get that's going to fit, and how are we going to figure it out? And there's going to be a learning curve. So while obviously the migration and the fixes, it's a part of the process, the learning curve, because it's likely going to be a new system that, while it'll be much more powerful, it's going to also cause us to have some time figuring out. Now, here, critical systems, like in that example, they're outdated and unsupported. Integration is complex, and there's going to be security vulnerabilities and talent scarcity. In other words, there's a good chance there's a possibility that when it comes to some of the tech stacks that you may need to be modernizing, you're not going to find anybody who can do it. And that is why, this process is just so challenging. And, this is actually cited by PE firms as a primary deal concern, 43% of them. And, having seen it, I can understand why, just because of the fact that a PE firm, especially since they're a financial buyer, their interest is going to be in trying to really make this as profitable as quickly as possible. Legacy systems that need to be upgraded, that's going to be a real deal killer, just because of the fact it's going to take a lot longer to get things profitable like they want them to be. So again, legacy systems are going to take the longest because you literally cannot rush a proper migration without destroying your business operations in the process. But here is what makes it worse. When you're dealing with old systems everyone can see, there's something far more insidious sliding throughout your entire tech stack. Problems that are completely invisible to your operations, but are glaringly obvious to buyers. So let's take a look at this one, and that is technical debt time bombs. Now, what are these? Well, it could be accumulated shortcuts, workarounds, deferred maintenance on stuff. And I'll confess, when I really, during the early part of my career before I got married, I really didn't quite understand this. Then I got married to a web developer who very quickly explained what this concept was. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. I understand it. And really, when it comes to accumulated shortcuts, it's like, okay, let's do this. It's easier. Should we do it? Probably not. We should probably fix it and actually get it right. But, there's only so many of these workarounds that you can do before everything falls apart. Invisible to operations is obvious. It's obvious in code review. This is, I know, one thing that, developers really get frustrated is because they see these problems in code, But, the people like you and me, we're like, well, I just see a really nice website. You're telling me that there are all these issues with this code that need to be fixed? I mean, I don't see it. And that this is part of one of the reasons why, with deferred maintenance, even when it comes to buildings, it tends to get punted, is because we look at it and we don't see. We don't see these problems. They're hidden and they're structural and they're serious, but we don't see them. Now, there's a good chance that, you're going to be underestimating the impact of that with working on these things. Um, and there's a very good chance. So really, just making sure that you get to the bottom of it. And really, what at this point I would talk, with your developer and just say, okay, we want to do it right. Yes, it's going to be really difficult, but let's just try to figure out what we need to do, and just really fix this problem once and for all. And again, this could take 1 to 2 years. Again, just because developers aren't going to be involved, you're not really going to be involved in this. Like, for example, when I'm working with you to develop procedures or policies or iron out processes, do strategic planning, budget development and controls, those activities, we're going to be heavily involved in. Here, we're going to be talking with, the developers, but once they get to work trying to fix the technical debt, you know, you're probably not going to have really that many touch points. But understanding what's going on and the timetable involved is crucial. And one thing I should mention is, you know, don't take all of these timetables as, set in stone. There's a good chance that depending on the project that you might be taking, it could take substantially longer. It could take substantially shorter. In fact, a lot of the statistics in this, while they're decent averages, the reality is, just because I said, okay, it's X amount, we're going to take this length of time, you know, trust what your developer says, and listen to them, and just be aware that yes, this is going to be a big project. So again, technical debt is the everything works fine trap. I mean, your systems function, your team gets by, everything seems adequate. But that's until, the buyer does during due diligence and is looking under the hood. And then, they're spending some time and they're like, hey, let's take us, just because of the nature of this company, could we maybe do a code review? And, that's kind of like, you're taking a vehicle to get maintenance, and they're like, I got good news and bad news for you. The good news is this repair is going to be under $10,000, but the bad news is you need a new head gasket. So that's really the situation you could be in, is if you don't address it, is when it comes time for them to do the due diligence. And honestly, no buyer is going to want to buy a vehicle that needs a new head gasket unless they're buying the vehicle for parts, which means you're going to have to take a huge discount. So, technical debt, again, it's invisible. Now, the next issue that we're going to be looking at is the exact opposite. It's the one thing that can kill your deal instantly, and 73% of private equity firms say that it is non-negotiable. We're talking about cybersecurity black holes. Now, again, as I said, 73% of PE firms call undisclosed breaches absolute deal breakers. If you've had a breach of security, obviously you need to be transparent about it, because if you had that problem, and you try to gloss over it, well, as I said, 3 out of 4 PE firms are going to walk the other way. This is standard in due diligence, and just making sure that we have any issues, just making sure that they're properly addressed. Now, what's the cost of a breach in disclosure? Well, you could, best case scenario, 15 to 30% valuation drop, or the deal could be terminated. So, if you've had issues, be transparent. And what you should be saying is, you should be saying not only, yeah, we've had this issue, but also we fixed it. That is going to help save you big time. Now, Obviously, what you need is you need to have testing and incident response plans. In other words, when it comes to cybersecurity, it's a type of thing that, you should assess. You should just get whatever you can in place and just make sure, especially depending on the nature of the business, if you're very heavily dependent on tech, just make sure that you are as secure as you possibly can. Now, security really has gone from a nice to have to a deal breaker. And again, that 73% means that nearly three out of PE firms are simply going to walk away if they discover security issues that you didn't disclose. Let that sink in. The security issues are obviously deal killers, and everyone understands that risk. There's another category that's equally expensive, but far less obvious to most business owners. And most people are going to think this is an accounting issue until you fall into that, and that's the software licensing landmines. And again, the content here, is going to be aimed more back to late 20th century when everything was. We had these programs that you could download onto your computer. Now this is shifting since we're moving more towards everything being cloud based, but a lot of the principles here remain the same. Unlicensed installations, seat violations, transferability restrictions, um, and for cloud-based programs, what we could say is, like under that seat violation, it's like, okay, you have one user and 50 people using it. I mean, that's a very quick violation. And it can create some significant escrow holds, especially if we're discovering, okay, wait, you're not, you know, you're underusing things properly in terms of, like, when it comes to licensing, you're not compliant. And some of these enterprise licenses may be non-transferable, which is a big problem. You really should look into it. And really, what on this point, what is best is to have a complete audit and renegotiation. Is just review everything that you have, make sure that it is fitting, make sure it's what you need. Hey, if you discover, okay, wait, actually we have multiple people using one user account, fix that right away. Just address it and make sure that it's very clearly against all policies to, do anything like that in the future. Now, software licensing, or in the case of, like, which really is cloud-based technologies, might be a better term now. It may seem boring until due diligence reveals that you've been operating with compliance issues, or that your enterprise software licenses didn't transfer in acquisition, and we got a problem. And now suddenly you're facing some significant escrow or deal delays just because you're working through that. So even if you solve licensing and have perfect security and clean code, none of that matters if your underlying data is amiss. And this is really where the integration nightmares begin. And this is where we are going to take a quick look at data architecture chaos. This is where, what is this to look like? Well, you have inconsistent formats, you have conflicting database, you really have no master data management. You don't have one central place where, like, okay, this is where we put all the customer contact information, and we'll have it set up so it can sync to other apps. And data migration could possibly exceed as much as 500,000 for mid-sized businesses. Now, again, this is, that we're going across the spectrum. It's possible that it may not be that much. It's possible it may be more. But, if we're trying to get the data cleaned up and fixed up, and there's been no effort to get it cleaned up, it could get very pricey very fast. And 40% of integration delays is usually caused by data problems. It's bad data, incomplete data, and likely this is going to cause 1 to 2 years to fix properly. It could take longer, especially if, let's say, you have 30 years of data and it's never been really cleaned up and it's inconsistent. It could be even more. So while I'm giving you a ballpark, just be ready that, if you've not really tried to clean up your data, this could be a massive, massive project that's going to just result in, really being a very expensive fix. Data architecture problems, just like a lot of these other issues, are invisible until someone tries to merge your customer database with theirs. Or, maybe combine financial reporting, especially, if your business is going to be acquired and become a subsidiary and there's going to be consolidated financial statements. And, oh, wait, now we have a bit of a miss here. Or, they're going to try to consolidate operational metrics, and it's like, okay, this just does not make any sense to us at all. And, at that moment, that's when the buyers start calculating, okay, how's this much going to fix? Because this is how much they're going to have to decrease their offer just because they're going to need to fix this. So, in short, even if you feel like your systems are perfect and you have clean data and good security, what happens if that's actually not the case? I mean, there's a difference, and I've seen this with owners before. There's a big difference between what they think and what they really have. And, this is where, it's going to become a serious problem. And you just need to make sure that, okay, yeah, you may think you have clean data. Do you actually have data? And make sure that your data architecture is as clean and as tidy as possible. Now, next area, importance of documentation and, just not having things documented. You're missing your system architecture, API docs, disaster recovery procedures, or, let's say again, let's say billing is, they're you needing to input information both into your accounting software and your CRM. So that way, your customer service can have access to that. Well, if you don't have that process documented how it's supposed to happen, it's anybody's guess what's going to happen. Now, this could cause a significant valuation, maybe between 5 to 10%, due to really the risk of knowledge transfer. And obviously, what I want to be clear what I'm talking about here is I'm not necessarily just talking about processes and policies and procedures organization wide. If you don't have those documented, it doesn't matter. You're not going to sell the business. Or, the private equity is going to give such a steeply valued offer that it's really not going to be worth your time. This is focusing specifically on the tech stack, which means, okay, you may even have, the processes and procedures like I was talking about earlier outlined, but, the other documentation you don't have. And if you don't have that, it's like, okay, well, somebody's going to need to come and figure it out. And if it's going to be us, well, we want to take this, we want to make sure that we have everything appropriately priced, aka there's going to be a drop in value. Now, of course, the phrase, which is "it's all in Bob's head," that's a nightmare scenario, and that's when, if you hear that, deal over, forget it. So if it's all in Bob's head, that might work for running your business today, but it's going to be a valuation killer. I mean, they're just going to walk. They're not going to even bother to ask anymore. Because what happens if Bob dies tomorrow? Exactly. It dies with him. So valuation, so documentation is about creating binders. It is eliminating the key person risk. So that way everything is written down and it doesn't matter who it is. They can look at it and they can make it work. Speaking of operational risk, there is one more category that business owners consistently overlook because they confuse efficiency with automation. Now, this is manual process anchors, which, this is manual data entry. You have like 7 different programs you need to enter the same in, spreadsheet workflows, email approvals. And, this is going to be creating an operational ceiling, limiting buyer growth. This investment, I mean, just to give you an idea, if you invest 50 to maybe 200,000, you could actually wind up eliminating full-time positions. And the reason why is because the work that they're doing, it doesn't need to be done. They're just, and you might be thinking, okay, well, that's kind of harsh. You're saying that we need to fire them? No, you actually could. They're probably competent individuals who could be hired and giving something else, but they're wasting away. What you're doing to them by having them do, all this um, data entry and whatnot, you know, they are professionally, they're not attaining what they could be. They could be much more. And, just by reworking it, there's a good chance that, because of the work they've been doing, they may actually be rather experienced and capable of doing analyst work. Or, it might be somewhere else. But the point is, I'm not trying to say, this is a way for you to, eliminate their job and move them on. I mean, they've been with your company, they understand things, they have a lot of value. It's a matter of the problem is not necessarily their value, it's about the value that they're doing. And we need to find, okay, what is a way that we can give them something that is more valuable? So that's all 7 issues. Now, you're probably thinking this sounds expensive. How much is this going to cost me and is it actually worth? There's a good chance this could be close to 7 figures, likely 6 figures. And again, a lot of that depends on just how much work. If your business has been open for 40 years and you've done absolutely none of what's laid out here, there's a very good chance that this is going to be very expensive. But here's a reality: if you do all these things, it is going to very much be worth it. And the reason why is, we're going to take a look at the ROI, excuse me. Okay, you might wind up investing $500,000 to 1.5 million over 5 years total. Look at that valuation increase, and and in addition, the return on investment that you're getting. Which, and the reason why that ROI between 250 to 1,680%, which, by the way, I have seen that play out. It is astonishing, the return on investment. And this isn't necessarily just in money, this is also in time. So the reason why this is such an investment is, you might be thinking, it's going to cost a lot, but at the end of the day, especially that ROI on tech investment, that's your earnout once the business is sold. It's going to be so much more efficient, which means it's going to be very profitable and productive. So you're going to be looking at some really good earnout figures. So why does this? Now you might be thinking, okay, I see this, and there's a good chance it's going to take 3 to 5 years, which, interestingly enough, that's how it takes for the entire process. Why does it take 3.5 years, 3 to 5 years? Well, here is why the timeline isn't optional. The shortest fix is, we could probably get them ready in 6 months. Medium complexity, 12 to 24 months. The longer projects could be 18 to 36 months. If we're trying to just focus on the tech stack, we're going to have to do it one at a time. We cannot, just because of the fact that, the other areas that I'm going to be working on, strategic planning, budget development, we can't get this all knocked out at once. And there's a good chance that, some of this stuff will actually dovetail with other things. But the point is, we can't have all these major initiatives going on at once without causing problems. And since there's a lot of other work that needs to be done, we need to make sure that, we're able to get everything done in a balanced and well-rounded capacity. And, here's another aspect too, is sequential dependencies could mean that some projects are actually going to need to finish before others start. So there's also the chance that, okay, even though we could possibly work on 2 simultaneously, we need to finish this project and this project before we even get started. So there's that consideration. Now, here's where the timeline really matters, because buyers aren't taking your word for any of this. They're going to examine everything that I've described, and what exactly they're going to be looking at when it comes to M&A technology due diligence. It's going to look something like this. They're going to be assessing your infrastructure. Is the architecture that you have as far as your tech stack, is it scalable? Is it well built with its architecture? Do you have the ability to recover things in the event of disaster? There's going to need to be security evaluation, penetration testing, compliance certifications. There's going to be a code quality review likely. They're going to look at technical debt, development practices. With data analysis, they're going to be looking at the quality of data, architecture, and integration complexity. When it comes to software or cloud technologies, they're going to be looking at licensing. They're going to look at transferability. They're going to look at vendor relationships. And then finally, they're going to look at integration planning. Are things compatible? And can we, if we need to do migration, how complex is it? So, obviously not every business is going to have to face this, depending on the nature of the business, how it's structured. There are some businesses that I worked with, and I think, okay, there could have been a lot less due diligence when it came to tech stack. But then, just because of how heavily tech dependent we are, and the fact that, some companies need to have multiple apps in their tech stack, then, it could be rather extensive, just making sure that everything is looking good. So here is your action plan when it comes to exit preparation. First thing, comprehensive assessment and strategic planning. I know if you're going to be working with me, that is one of the first things that we're going to do. We're not going to just look at tech stack. We're going to look at a lot of other things, and we're going to think, okay, what do we need to do in order to get everything ready? Years to 2 to 3 are going to be executing high priority remediation, which is going to likely be legacy modernization and cybersecurity. And then, the next couple of years, complete remaining improvements and documentation. You know, it'd be safe to budget anywhere from 110 to 280K annually over 5 years. Some years it might be more, some years it might be less, but that's kind of like the average. So this is a systematic operational transformation, not a pre-sale cleanup. Year 1 is the assessment, and then years 2 to 3 are tackling the big projects, and then years 4 and 5 you're simply completing the work. So this is what brings us to your decision point, and it's not whether to invest in tech improvement, but whether you'll do it systematically, or you're going to need to be ready to accept millions in valuation reduction at exit. Here is how you get started. On this website, on my the description in YouTube, you have a link to my exit planning tool suite. You could schedule a discovery call if you want. I have plenty of resources, and really the key thing that you need to keep in mind is start now, or you need to plan on accepting a significant valuation reduction. And remember, the reason why we say it takes 3 to 5 years to exit is just because of the fact that there is a lot of work that we cannot be doing all at once, because your business needs to remain profitable and productive. So if you're 3 to 5 years from exit, the time to start is now. I'd love to talk with you, and I would strongly encourage you to reach out to me and begin the conversation. Well, I wanted to thank you all for joining me during this webinar, and I hope you all have a great rest of this day and enjoy the rest of the week. So.